In early 1968, the Byrds were a band badly in need of a sense of direction. Performing as a trio, they had limped through an underwhelming US tour before returning to LA to harvest fresh ideas. McGuinn's initial proposal was an epic double album and an ethnographic journey through American music.
McGuinn had this incredibly grandiose vision of producing a double album featuring the entire history of 20th century music, going from ragtime through to bluegrass, through to goodness knows what, and country, culminating in space music, or the most advanced electronic music he could possibly perform. So it was going to have everything, presumably from banjos to synthesizers on it, all on one double album. Crazy idea, but brilliant. I mean, it made it made Notorious Byrd Brothers sound like bubblegum by comparison. I mean, this was McGuinn at his most wonderfully ambitious.
The project failed to attract much enthusiasm from either Chris Hillman or producer Gary Usher, but the band were in agreement that pursuing jazz rock or electronic concepts was an attractive proposition. To this end, they auditioned for a keyboardist, and ex-International Submarine Band member Graham Parsons got the job.
Graham Parsons brought a new geography to the Byrds. He was an aspiring singer-songwriter. He'd been in various groups. He'd come to Hollywood. He had a trust fund. He was very wealthy, privileged, but very popular kind of guy, articulate, educated.
Graham Parsons had a great reverence for traditional country music, and I respected him for that, and he was really genuine with his interest in that. And he was clearly a gifted songwriter. I enjoyed his treatment of keyboard. I liked the way he played the piano. I don't think that he was particularly special in any way as far as a vocalist, although his style was very pleasing and unique, I suppose, because it seems to be pretty honest and unaffected. I didn't really see anything real special about Graham other than the fact that he was unusually very interested in country music.
He found a link with Hillman. They both had an interest in bluegrass and country music in general, and they wanted to bring that into the Byrds. McGuinn, had no real background in country music, so that was a bit alien to him, but he went along with it. He thought it sounded interesting.
Well, I think Graham Parsons rescued the Byrds. I think at this point where he comes in, it's hard to see what the Byrds stand for. And you can see the attraction of Graham to them in a way. I mean, I think he was probably far more country than McGuinn had ever intended with his own plan, but Parsons had this phrase, he called it cosmic American music, and that certainly struck a chord with McGuinn, who was interested in the history of American music, Americana if you want to call it that.
The instant rapport between Parsons and Hillman identified country music as the terrain for the latest Byrds experiment. Though the country industry represented something of a gated community, the band traveled to its spiritual core, Nashville, to record their 6th studio album, Sweetheart of the Rodeo.
Country music existed in a complicated relationship to rock and roll. At the same time as Dylan was going to record in Nashville, and the Beatles would do a song like Act Naturally, and the Stones would do a Hank Snow song. There was a sense in which, country then represented a kind of conservatism, that was against culturally what rock and roll represented, even as, country was a big part of what rock and roll was in the first place, particularly on its rockabilly aspect.
There was this disparate monolith called Nashville, and it was Bakersfield. There were those things. We were very conscious of them. And out of that midst came Merle Haggard. That rugged rustication you get from country music that strikes at some certain truth without too much folderol. Maybe music that comes out of the hymnal, that experience of low church hymns and so forth. And you get that in Merle Haggard's music. And you get that. That was what was so appealing about those melodies. And they were ripe for picking. That is, that area of thought was ripe for picking. It's almost like the Byrds decided to go ahead and enter that. And that was a very dangerous thing to do at the time.
You have to understand that Nashville was very structured. You know, if you're a singer, they immediately say, we'll give you a contract without your band. We'll bring in our guys. We'll bring in our photographer. We'll bring in our producer. You step into a machine. So the idea of a bunch of hippies, right, who don't need the machine, they write the songs, they play all the instruments, is completely going against the formula that has worked for years and years and years.
In making such a dangerously bold change of direction, the Byrds reached for the security of the Bob Dylan songbook that had served them so effectively in the past. Taken from the as-yet unreleased basement tapes, Sweetheart of the Rodeo opened with a country interpretation of Bob Dylan's You Ain't Going Nowhere.
They needed an identity, and I think, look, Dylan provided the identity. It was a link back to the past, and at the same time, everybody was fascinated by it to hear what Dylan had been producing in the basement tapes. And those tapes are going around at the time. And in a sense, you know, I think the Byrds had, you know, pretty well close to the first shot on those songs. It was certainly one of the first artists to do songs from basement tapes.
Clouds so swift, rain won't lift, gate won't close, railings froze. Get your mind off winter time, you ain't going nowhere.
Opening the album with a Dylan song is, I suppose, their way of saying this isn't just some cheesy country record. We still have got a rock and roll link here.
Whether or not a Dylan composition was selected to emphasize their folk rock heritage, the pedal steel guitar accompaniment and distinctive arrangement of You Ain't Going Nowhere, seen here as performed alongside bluegrass legend Earl Scruggs, suggested that the Byrds had recast themselves as an authentically country act.
When I hear Sweetheart of the Rodeo, first of all, I don't hear a very strong connection to the sound of the Byrds in the first 5 records. And it doesn't sound like there's as much rock music going on there as there is country music. And the country music they're performing, they're doing it well, but it doesn't seem to have much raucous energy, or what we would say is rock and roll energy. I think part of the reason it's viewed as such a landmark is that it's the first time that a rock group of any such stature moved into country music so wholeheartedly. It's almost the first time a rock band changed stylistic directions so radically from album to album ever.
This drastic reimagining of both the Byrds' musical and cultural context perplexed critics across America. As with Mr. Tambourine Man, the music press sought to find a new vocabulary with which to discuss the sound of Sweetheart of the Rodeo, and they quickly labeled the album country rock.
Up to that point, there was just it was either straight country music, or Elvis Presley came out and, you know, did his thing, you know, and some of the other early rockers, Jerry Lee Lewis and some of those guys, you know. And that was about it. So to mix country music with a rock flavor was unheard of. It was neat, you know. It was different in a way, but still, it was still essentially country music. Nowadays, it'd be real country music. I mean, real